Hey guys, tonight we are heading out into the Australian outback where the dust hangs in the air like red smoke. And the horizon feels like it might just swallow you whole. You can almost taste the iron in the soil. And your boots crunch as you walk past twisted old rail tracks that don't seem to lead anywhere. The sun is low, throwing long, eerie shadows, and the whole place feels haunted, not by ghosts with sheets and rattling chains, but by the memory of something enormous that used to happen here. And honestly, if you had to trek this far under this sun without a camel, you probably wouldn't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The old siding you're standing on is barely there anymore. Just a splintered platform, a few weathered posts, and a lonely windmill creaking like it hasn't had oil since World War II. The sand has swallowed most of the wooden sleepers, and the rails glint faintly under the sinking sun. If you crouch down, you see faint depressions in the ground, maybe from wheels, maybe from hooves, or, if you know your history, from the giant padded feet of camels. Hundreds of them, padding into camp after weeks crossing the. You can almost hear it now, the clank of brass bells, the groaning of leather harnesses, the soft snort of 100 camels kneeling down on command. And then, human voices, thick with accent, some speaking Pashto, some Urdu, a few gruff English curses thrown in for good measure. This was once one of the lifelines of the inland, a place where caravans stopped, unloaded, traded, and then trudged off again toward some place so far away you'd swear it was just a mirage. Historically, these sightings popped up wherever there was water and a few settlers brave enough, or crazy enough, to live here. They served as nodes where camel teams could offload goods brought from coastal ports. Everything from flour to corrugated iron, even pianos for settlers with more optimism than sense. And while railways eventually connected much of Australia, there was a time when if you wanted anything moved beyond the edge of the map, you prayed for a cameleer. Here's a fun fact to keep you awake. The word Afghan was used for just about anyone who worked the camel trade, but many of them weren't from Afghanistan at all. Some were from what is now Pakistan, some from India, even a few from Egypt. Imagine showing up in the outback and everyone just calling you the Afghan, no matter what your passport said. Historians still argue whether this was harmless shorthand or casual colonial laziness, but it stuck. And that's what most of the ghost stories call them now. The camp itself would have been a riot of smells: camel sweat, wood smoke, boiling tea with cardamom and clove, and probably a whiff of dung too. You'd see canvas tents, hastily patched, set in a half circle like little teeth around the fire. Maybe a prayer rug unrolled on the ground, catching the last rays of sunset. Because faith traveled with these men as surely as their cargo did. You might think this is all romantic, you, under the stars, sipping chai with cameleers, telling stories while the desert cools. But it wasn't all poetry. There were snakes to watch for, scorpions that crawled into boots, and settlers who weren't exactly thrilled about camel trains traipsing past their homesteads. And then there were the flies. Oh, the flies. Imagine trying to eat dinner with a cloud of them doing kamikaze runs at your eyes, nose, and every crumb you drop. If you've ever complained about mosquitoes in summer, you have no idea. Tonight, you sit quietly, letting your imagination fill in the sounds. A distant dingo howl, the stamp of a camel's foot, the soft mumbling of men counting stock, tallying goods, arguing about tomorrow's route. Someone laughs, short and sharp. You feel the warmth of the fire and the way the stars look impossibly close out here. As if you could just stand up and brush them with your hand. There's a little edge to the air though, a feeling that you're not just an observer but a trespasser. Walking where history hasn't quite finished playing out. The desert keeps its memories long after we forget. And standing here, you can sense it holding on to the rhythm of those caravan bells. And just when you think it's all too quiet, you catch the faintest sound of a train whistle, so far away it's more ghost than sound. That's the other thing about this sighting. It's a place where two worlds overlapped, the slow, loping world of the camel train, and the shrieking, steaming world of the railway that would soon sweep it all aside. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, the caravan is still here. The men are still sitting by the fire. The camels are still resting in the dust, chewing slowly with that look that says they know something you don't. You take a deep breath, taste the dry night air, and settle in. There's a long road ahead. The next morning, you wake up to a sky so wide it feels like it might tip over and crush you. The first thing you hear is the guttural rumble of camels waking. A sound somewhere between a cough and a complaint. These animals are not exactly morning people, if you could call them people, and they let everyone know it. The cameleers are already moving, checking ropes, loading bundles, and shouting orders that bounce across the red plain. You stand near the makeshift corral and watch them work. It's mesmerizing, the way they loop ropes around awkward loads of flour, sugar, barrels of kerosene, and a strange mix of mining equipment that looks like it belongs in a steampunk fair. Each camel kneels patiently, well, mostly patiently, while its load is adjusted and tied down. A few grumble dramatically, gurgling like old plumbing. You can't help but laugh when one turns its long head toward you and gives you the kind of side-eye usually reserved for a cat about to knock over your coffee mug. The journey of camels into Australia started long before you showed up here in your dusty sneakers. The very first ones arrived in 1840, brought over by the British to help explore the vast, mysterious interior. Imagine sailing halfway across the world just to unload a ship full of confused camels into a place even hotter and drier than where they came from. The plan worked surprisingly well. Camels thrived here. They could go weeks without water, carry loads that would break a horse, and barely seem to notice the heat. They were, in every sense, the perfect machine for the job. And the cameleers, often labeled Afghans, followed. They weren't just drivers, they were handlers, healers, traders, sometimes even mediators between settlers and indigenous groups. Some worked under contract, others built small businesses of their own. They became experts at reading the country, finding wells, predicting sandstorms, and knowing when to stop and rest. Historians still argue whether their arrival was purely practical or whether it opened up uncomfortable social tensions, but either way, Australia's interior would have stayed a blank map for much longer without them. You trudge along behind the caravan now, the soft sand giving way to stretches of stony plain. The heat rises quickly, and soon the air wobbles in shimmering waves. The cameleers move in single file, each camel roped to the next, their big feet making almost no sound. It's like watching a living train glide across the desert. If you close your eyes, you could almost imagine the ocean, the slow rise and fall of waves, the creak of wood. Maybe that's why they called them ships of the desert. There's a fringe story that one camel got loose on the docks of Port Melbourne and refused to kneel for anyone, causing chaos and allegedly kicking over a barrel of rum that rolled dramatically into the bay. Whether that really happened is anyone's guess, but you kind of hope it did. It's the kind of chaos that feels right at home in a port full of 19th century sailors. The caravan stops briefly at a muddy billabong, the only water for miles. You kneel and splash your face while the camels drink in long, lazy gulps, their throats working like slow pistons. You feel the tension of survival here, how everything depends on these watering points. Miss one, and it's game over. No save points, no reload last checkpoint. Just you, the blazing sun, and a lot of regret. As the day wears on, you notice the landscape change. The soil goes from red to pale yellow, dotted with tough spinifex grass that crunches underfoot. You pass bones, kangaroo, maybe cattle, bleached white by years of sun. A crow sits nearby, watching you like it knows you're just passing through its kingdom. Out here, nothing really belongs to you. When night finally comes, you feel like you've stepped into another planet. The stars are so sharp they seem to buzz. The camels are hobbled and set loose to graze, their shadows stretching across the sand like prehistoric creatures. You sit near the fire with the cameleers, sipping tea that tastes smoky and sweet. One of the men hums softly, a tune that might be from Kandahar or Karachi, you can't tell. but it fits perfectly with the rhythm of the night. The conversation drifts to stories of exploration, of men like Burke and Wills, whose ill-fated expedition relied on camels before it all went horribly wrong. Some argue they starved because they refused to fully trust the knowledge of their cameleers and aboriginal guides. Historians still argue whether arrogance, bad planning, or just bad luck doomed them, but tonight, with the fire crackling and the desert breathing around you, it feels like a cautionary tale. You lean back on your rolled-up swag and stare at the Milky Way. You think about how weird it is that a creature from halfway across the planet became the key to unlocking this land. And you wonder what the first settlers must have thought, watching a camel appear out of the haze, loaded with goods, led by a man in robes. To them, it must have looked like a mirage stepped straight out of the Arabian Nights. Somewhere nearby, a camel makes that unmistakable gargling sound again, and everyone laughs. It breaks the tension, reminds you that this is work, not legend, and tomorrow, there will be more miles to walk. You roll onto your side, pull your blanket over your shoulder, and let the desert lull you to sleep. You wake before dawn, blinking against the faint glow of a sky that hasn't yet decided if it wants to be morning. The cameleers are already moving like ghosts, their silhouettes backlit by the first streaks of pale pink. The fire from last night still smolders, sending up a thin trail of smoke that smells of eucalyptus. You brush the fine desert dust from your clothes. At this point you suspect the dust has become a permanent accessory, and watch as the caravan slowly comes to life. The road ahead today is brutal. You can feel it in the air, heavy and dry, a warning that the sun will have no mercy. The cameleers tighten ropes, check water skins, and make sure each animal is loaded just right. A camel with an uneven load will throw a fit. And trust me, there is nothing quite as dramatic as a 600-kilogram drama queen sitting down in protest. You begin the march, and almost immediately the horizon starts to shimmer with heat. The Gibber Plains stretch out ahead, flat as a tabletop, covered in tiny stones polished by thousands of years of wind. It's strange. The stones look like they've been oiled, glinting darkly under the sun, as if the earth itself were sweating. Walking here is punishing. The glare is blinding, and the heat radiates up from the ground, cooking you from both sides. This is where camels prove their worth. They pad along as if the heat is just an annoying rumor. Their feet spread wide on the stony surface, and their bodies barely seem to sweat. Horses would be dropping from exhaustion by now, but the camels just keep going, one step after another, like living freight trucks with a bad attitude. Historically, this is how huge stretches of Australia were mapped. Explorers like John McDowell Stewart relied on camels to cross these plains, carrying everything from food to survey equipment. Without camels, those expeditions might have turned back or never left at all. And here's your quirky fact for today. Some cameleers painted names or charms on their camels' sides in chalk before a journey, almost like giving a car a good luck sticker. Imagine being the guy tasked with decorating a camel before breakfast, not a job for the faint of heart. By midday, the heat has gone from uncomfortable to absurd. You can feel sweat trickling down your back, soaking into the waistband of your pants. Your hat brim flaps in the hot wind, and your water bottle feels like it's been microwaved. The air is so dry it seems to steal the moisture from your lungs. The caravan halts near a rocky outcrop that offers a scrap of shade. Everyone collapses into it, including you, grateful just to get out of the sun for 10 minutes. One of the cameleers hands you a lump of something that looks suspiciously like fudge but turns out to be a dense date cake. It's sticky, sweet, and somehow both refreshing and dehydrating at the same time. The camels kneel and chew methodically, their jaws moving in slow motion. You think about the settlers who must have watched these trains approach across the plains. To them, it must have felt like the future had finally arrived. Caravans didn't just bring supplies, they brought news, letters, gossip, and sometimes the only human contact people had in months. Imagine waiting 6 weeks for a letter that just says, "Hope the sheep are doing well," and you thought your Wi-Fi was slow. As the day stretches on, you catch yourself falling into a kind of trance. The endless crunch of feet on gravel, the occasional bell clink, the deep silence between gusts of wind, it all becomes hypnotic. Maybe that's why some explorers wrote about hearing phantom sounds out here, like music or voices calling from far away. Historians still argue whether these were hallucinations from heatstroke or something more mysterious. But tonight, with the sun hammering your brain, you can totally believe it. Eventually, the caravan reaches a clay pan. A vast, flat expanse that looks like the surface of a forgotten planet. The cameliers decide to camp here. There's no wood for a fire, so they burn dried camel dung, which crackles softly and smells exactly like you'd expect. You sit nearby, trying not to breathe too deeply, and listen to the men talk. They speak of routes, of wells that might be dry, of storms that might be brewing days away. One man mentions a story of a caravan that vanished out here, swallowed by a sandstorm so fierce no trace of it was ever found. It's the kind of story that makes you glance at the horizon a little nervously. As night falls, the temperature plummets. You wrap yourself in a blanket and lie back, staring at the stars again. The Milky Way stretches overhead, so bright it feels like someone spilled glitter across the sky. The camels lie down in a row, their dark shapes like giant boulders. One groans softly, a sound weirdly comforting, like a reminder that life persists even in the most unforgiving places. You think about how strange it is to be here, walking a path that's been walked for over a century, following animals that aren't even native to this land. It's like stepping into a living contradiction, foreign creatures making this place habitable. Foreign men connecting towns that might never have survived otherwise. And yet, as vital as it all feels, you can already sense the shadow of what's coming. Iron rails, smoke-belching engines, a new way of conquering distance. For now, though, it's just you, the desert, and a line of camels breathing slowly under the stars. Tomorrow, there will be more miles, more dust, and more stories waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, smoke from the dung fire curls lazily into the sky, the only cloud in sight. Your joints protest as you stand, even in this dreamlike setting. Sleeping on hard ground is still sleeping on hard ground. The cameliers are already bustling about, muttering to one another as they prepare to move on. But tonight will be different. They tell you, tonight you'll stop at a permanent camp. A place that feels almost like a small town, if you squint hard enough. The caravan marches on, and by late afternoon, you spot it. A cluster of canvas tents, a few rough huts, and a windmill clattering in the hot wind. A handful of children run out to meet the camels, shrieking with delight. This is one of the so-called gone towns, settlements that sprang up near railheads, wells, or telegraph stations where cameliers gathered between journeys. You step into the camp, and immediately the smells hit you: smoke, dust, camel sweat, and something much more pleasant: chai simmering in a battered pot, rich with cardamom and sugar. One of the men ladles you a tin cup, and you sip carefully. It's strong, almost syrupy, and it warms you from the inside even though the air is still roasting. Gone towns were more than just overnight stops. They were places where culture bloomed in the middle of nowhere. Here, you might find a small mosque built from corrugated iron, prayer calls drifting over the dunes at sunset. You'd see men in flowing robes, women in bright saris if families had joined them, and maybe an Aboriginal man or two sharing a meal. Evidence of how communities overlapped and mingled. The cameliers trade goods here too: flour for fresh meat, kerosene for news from town. You watch as a man haggles over a bolt of fabric, both parties grinning as though the argument is part of the entertainment. Children play in the dust, and somewhere a harmonium wheezes a slow tune. Here's a mainstream fact for you. Many of these gone towns became permanent enough to have cemeteries, some of which still exist today. You can find them tucked behind modern fences. Gravestones carved with Arabic inscriptions, half buried in weeds but still telling their stories to anyone willing to look. But the quirky part of gone town life? Camel races. Yes, they happen. Informal competitions between handlers who couldn't resist a little rivalry. Imagine a dusty track, men shouting, camels loping along with that awkward gallop of theirs, and a crowd cheering like it's the Melbourne Cup. Whether the camels enjoyed it is anybody's guess, but the bragging rights afterward must have been worth it. As evening falls, you sit near the communal fire. Someone passes around flatbread, and another man slices off hunks of salted meat. The food is simple, but after a long day, it tastes like a feast. The conversation turns to news of the outside world, letters from home, rumors of gold strikes, whispers of new railway lines being planned. Some of the cameliers frown at this. The railways might mean fewer jobs, fewer caravans. You can feel the unease settle over the group. One of the older men tells a story of when he first came to Australia. Stepping off the ship into a world so alien it felt like he had landed on Mars. He laughs softly, remembering the shock of seeing a kangaroo for the first time. Historians still argue whether these communities were well integrated into settler society or kept at arm's length. But sitting here tonight, you feel like you've been welcomed into a private, beating heart of the outback. The stars blink awake overhead, and the fire pops softly. Someone begins to sing, a low, rolling melody that seems to stretch across the night. You lean back, letting the sound wash over you. The air cool now against your skin. You think about how these settlements must have felt to lonely travelers, like an oasis. Not just of water and food, but of humanity. A dingo barks somewhere beyond the firelight. But no one moves. The camels are restless, shifting and groaning, their shadows dancing against the tents. You sip the last of your chai, sweet and gritty, and stare into the flames. For all the hardship, there is something deeply comforting about this life, the rhythm, the company, the sense of being exactly where you're supposed to be, even if it's in the middle of nowhere. Later, when you lie down to sleep, you can still hear the faint hum of voices, the clink of pots being cleaned, the slow, sleepy breath of camels. The desert is quiet, but not empty. It feels alive. The morning comes with a thin breeze that smells faintly of dust and something sharper, maybe sweat, maybe tension. You notice it right away. Today feels different. The cameliers move faster, speaking in short, clipped bursts. Their hands are quick as they pack the loads. And when you ask why, one man just points to the horizon and shrugs. There's a water well ahead, and if you don't get there before others, there may not be enough to go around. Water is the currency of survival out here. Forget gold, forget cash. If you can find water, you hold the power. And today, everyone seems to know it. You march with the caravan across hard ground until the windmill finally appears in the distance, its blades spinning lazily in the heat haze. But you're not alone. Another caravan is already there, their camels clustered tightly around the trough. The men are shouting at each other in a mix of languages, and the tension feels like it might ignite into something worse. You stand back as your cameliers approach. Negotiations begin, loud, animated, with plenty of pointing and waving. Apparently, the other group has been at the well for hours and has no intention of moving until their last camel has had its fill. Your group insists they're entitled to a turn before the sun climbs too high. Voices rise, and suddenly, you hear the unmistakable sound of a rifle bolt being drawn back. Welcome to the outback version of a water war. Historically, these conflicts weren't uncommon. Wells were lifelines, and if one ran dry, the next could be hundreds of kilometers away. Tensions flared not only between camel groups but also between cameliers and settlers whose livestock drank from the same water points. Some homesteaders went as far as to sabotage wells or refuse access entirely, leading to dangerous standoffs. It doesn't come to violence today, though. After a tense standoff, and several shouted insults that even you can tell are created, the other caravan grudgingly moves aside. Your camels lurch forward, their long necks stretching to reach the trough. The sound of them drinking is oddly satisfying, like a giant sink being filled. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some camels were said to be so picky they refused to drink from wells where cattle had been, as if they had higher standards than the settlers themselves. Imagine having to explain to your boss why the supply train is late because Gerald the camel turned up his nose at dirty water. With the camels watered, the mood lightens, but only a little. The journey continues past a remote homestead where a few horses graze nearby. One of the cameliers mutters something under his breath about brumbies. You glance toward the hills and spot a small mob of them, wild horses, descendants of the ones settlers released or lost generations ago. They watch the caravan with bright, wary eyes, and for a moment you can almost sense a challenge in their stillness. There was real rivalry between horses and camels in the early days. Settlers swore that camels spooked their stock, trampled fences, and made the horses skittish. And truth be told, camels could be a menace, tearing up watering points, breaking troughs, and leaving nothing for anyone else. Historians still argue whether the cameleers were unfairly blamed or if their animals really did wreak havoc. By late afternoon, the air feels charged, the sun hangs low, glaring like a searchlight. Dust rises from the caravan's feet, coating your skin in a fine, orange film. You arrive at another camp, this one rougher, quieter. There's no gone town here, just a few posts marking the well and a patch of flat ground for the night. The cameleers sit in a loose circle, muttering about the morning's confrontation. Dinner is simple. Flatbread toasted over the fire. Maybe a strip of dried meat if you're lucky. The mood is subdued, though. You can tell everyone is thinking about tomorrow. About the possibility of running into trouble again. After dark, a strange cry echoes across the plain, high, eerie, almost human. One of the men chuckles and tells you it's just a bush stone curlew. A bird with a call so haunting you'd swear the desert itself was crying. He says the old-timers considered it an omen, though no one agrees on whether it was good or bad. You lie back and stare at the stars. The memory of the morning's tension still tight in your chest. This isn't just a romantic trek across an empty landscape, it's survival. Day after day, and everyone here knows how quickly things can go wrong. Somewhere nearby, a camel groans, maybe from contentment, maybe from warning. You pull your blanket tighter, feeling the cool air slip into camp, and let yourself drift off, hoping tomorrow's road will be calmer. The next day dawns dry and windless. The kind of stillness that makes you nervous. The desert feels like it's holding its breath. The caravan sets off again, but the pace feels slower, heavier. Everyone seems distracted, scanning the horizon more than usual. And then, late in the morning, you see why. A line of smoke smudging the sky to the east. At first you think it's a bushfire. But no, it's too controlled, too steady. And then you hear it, the distant, rhythmic chug of an engine. It's the railway. You stop in your tracks as the sound grows louder, the vibration thrumming through the ground like a giant heartbeat. When the train finally appears, it's a surreal sight, a black iron beast belching smoke, dragging a chain of boxcars behind it. The camels startled, some of them kneeling suddenly as though they've just seen the devil himself. You can't blame them. The train looks like something from another world. This is the beginning of the end for the great camel caravans. Historically, the spread of railways in the late 19th and early 20th centuries transformed the outback. Where once it took weeks for goods to move inland, now they could be delivered in days. Settlers cheered the arrival of the train. It meant cheaper supplies, faster mail, and a sense of connection to the rest of the country. But for the cameleers, it was the slow death of their livelihood. You walk alongside the tracks for a while, kicking at the ballast stones, watching as the train disappears into the distance. There's something strangely final about the way its whistle echoes across the plains. Fading into silence, one of the cameleers spits into the dust and mutters something that sounds like a curse. You can feel the bitterness simmering just under the surface. But here's the twist. For a while, camels and trains actually worked together. The railways didn't reach everywhere right away, so cameleers took goods from the railhead and hauled them deeper into the interior. It was a strange overlap, like two eras shaking hands before one shoved the other out of the way. You reach a rail siding by afternoon, and it's bustling. Workers unload crates from a freight car while cameleers stand by, waiting for their turn to strap everything onto their animals. The air smells of coal smoke and hot metal, and for a moment you feel like you've stepped into the Industrial Revolution, except for the camels chewing cud in the background, glaring at the whole process like grumpy old men. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some train passengers swore they could smell camel long before the caravan came into view. The combination of sweat, dust, and dung apparently carried for kilometers. Like a traveling perfume no one asked for. You catch yourself sniffing the air, wondering if they were exaggerating, and decide they probably weren't. As night falls, you camp near the siding. The cameleers sit in a quieter circle tonight, their voices low. Someone jokes that one day, the trains will put them all out of work, and the laughter that follows is brittle. Historians still argue whether the end of the camel era was an inevitable step forward or a loss of a unique way of life that connected Australia's cultures in a way nothing else did. You lie awake longer than usual, staring up at the stars but listening to the faint, far-off sound of another train whistle. It feels like a countdown clock ticking away at the life of the caravan. The camels snort and shuffle in their sleep, unaware or maybe just uncaring. For them, tomorrow will be just another day to walk, to carry, to chew. But for the men tending them, tomorrow is one more day closer to the end of everything they know. When you finally drift off, you dream of iron tracks stretching endlessly across the desert, and camels pacing beside them, trying to keep up. You wake before dawn, the air crisp and cool, and for a moment you almost forget the looming shadow of the railway. The desert sky is a sheet of dark velvet, scattered with stars, and you watch as the first streaks of pale pink break over the horizon. The caravan moves quietly this morning, as if no one wants to disturb the fragile calm. But as you walk, you notice something strange. There are more camels than you started with. Some of them don't have packs, and a few look downright scruffy, with matted fur and old rope halters. It takes you a while to realize what's happening. These are strays. Half-wild camels that have wandered in from somewhere out there in the endless scrub. You ask one of the cameleers about them, and he shrugs. They just turn up sometimes. He says, once a camel's been here long enough, it doesn't need us anymore. And that's when it hits you. This is how Australia's wild camel population began. Historically, when camel caravans wound down, many animals were simply turned loose. They were too expensive to keep as pets, and there were no large slaughter markets for them in the outback. So, one by one, they were released into the wild, or escaped, and, because camels are ridiculously tough, they thrived. Today, there are an estimated 1 to 2 million feral camels roaming Australia. More than anywhere else in the world. You picture it. A country once considered too hostile even for livestock. Now home to giant herds of wandering camels, as though the desert decided to keep a piece of history for itself. Some are shy, avoiding people altogether, but others get into mischief, breaking into cattle stations, knocking over water tanks, even chewing on satellite dishes. It's a little comforting to think that the camels won't just vanish when the last caravan is gone. The cameleers, though, aren't smiling. To them, a camel without a master is a wasted investment, an insult to the effort it took to raise, train, and care for it. You can feel the unease ripple through the group when they see those strays watching from the ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the morning sky. By midday, you come across an old station homestead, now abandoned. The walls are half collapsed, the wind whistling through gaps where windows used to be. It smells of dust and sun-baked wood. The cameleers tie up the camels and poke through the ruins, finding a rusty horseshoe, a broken chair, the remnants of someone's once hopeful life. You sit on the steps and imagine what it must have been like when this place was alive, children running around, a dog barking, fresh bread cooling on the windowsill. And then you imagine the last day, when the settlers packed up and left, maybe catching the train to somewhere greener, leaving the desert to reclaim what was once hers. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some parts of the outback, people used to tie tin cans to gates so they'd rattle when the wind blew, scaring off stray camels that might try to wander in at night. You can almost hear the ghostly clang of those cans now, jangling softly in the breeze. As evening falls, the campfire burns lower than usual. There's a sense of quiet reverence, as though everyone knows the caravan is nearing its last great run. Historians still argue whether the release of so many camels was an ecological mistake or a strangely poetic gift, a living monument to the cameleers who brought them here. You lie on your back, staring at the Milky Way, and you imagine thousands of camels scattered across the continent, moving like ghosts under the same stars. It's a thought that's both comforting and eerie, and it follows you into sleep, where you dream of endless dunes and the soft, steady thud of camel feet on the sand. The sun wakes you with a sharp slap of light, and by the time you shake the dust out of your clothes, the caravan is already on the move. The landscape is changing again, fewer dunes now, more scrubby bushes, the occasional spindly tree. It feels like you're on the edge of something. Not quite desert but not quite pasture either. Today, the cameleers are quieter than usual, and you can tell something's on their minds. When you catch up to the leader, he tells you that tonight's camp will be special. one of the last big watering holes before the journey's end. The words hang in the air. Journey's end sounds suspiciously final. By midday, the ground starts to tremble faintly under your feet, not with the mechanical thrum of a train but with something far stranger. A sound like a distant stampede. At first you think it's just the wind playing tricks on you. But then, over the next rise, you see them. Camels. Hundreds of them. They're not with any caravan. There are no packs. No riders. No guides. This is a wild herd. The kind that most people never get to see. Their coats are dust-streaked. Their humps swaying as they move. And their sheer number is enough to make you stop and stare. The cameleers do too. Hats tipped back. Silent as the herd passes like a living river of fur and bone. You can feel the weight of history in this moment. These are the descendants of the camels brought here over a century ago. The ones who survived droughts, hunts, and the slow encroachment of settlement. And now, they rule the outback. Historically, these wild herds have been both a marvel and a headache. They drink from remote waterholes, sometimes draining them completely, and they trample fragile vegetation. At their peak numbers in the early 21st century, they were such a problem that Australia actually had to cull hundreds of thousands of them to protect ecosystems and remote communities. But as you watch them flow past like a tide, it's hard to think of them as a problem. They look like freedom incarnate. You make camp near a billabong that night. The water still as glass, reflecting the sunset in perfect orange and purple layers. The camels kneel and drink, their soft grunts echoing across the clearing. Somewhere out there, you hear the wild herd calling to each other. A deep, resonant rumble that sounds almost like thunder. Here's your quirky tidbit. Camels actually make an incredible range of sounds, bellows, moans, and even what sounds suspiciously like gurgling laughter. One of the younger camels near the water seems to be practicing, producing a ridiculous bubbling noise that makes you laugh despite yourself. The cameleers glance at you, then chuckle too. The first real laughter you've heard in days. After dinner, the cameleers share stories of the old days, when the routes were longer, the cargo heavier, and the pay better. They talk about storms that blew whole caravans off course, about nights when dingoes circled the camp until sunrise, about fights that broke out over stolen water barrels. They also talk about the men who left when the trains came, some finding work as laborers or station hands, others simply vanishing into the bush. Historians still argue whether these men, and their camels, were ever fully accepted into Australian identity, or whether they remained outsiders to the end. You can feel the weight of that question as you sit in the firelight, your face warm but your back chilled by the night air. Later, when everyone has drifted off to sleep, you walk to the edge of the billabong. The moon is high, painting the water silver, and you see something that makes you pause. A single wild camel standing apart from the herd, staring at you. For a moment, you feel as though it sees straight through you, into the bones of the earth itself. Then it turns and slips silently back into the darkness. You stand there a while longer, listening to the night sounds, the rustle of wind in the grass, the occasional grunt from the tethered animals, and, far away, the low thunder of hooves. Somewhere out there, history is still walking, and for now, you're part of it. Morning comes with a cool mist clinging to the billabong, softening every shape until even the camels look like pale ghosts. You pack up slowly, reluctant to leave this quiet place. The cameleers move deliberately, too, as though they know the next stretch will bring them close to the end of their route, and maybe the end of an era. You travel all day under a sky that grows steadily hotter. The land changes again, the scrub thins, the soil turns a deeper red, and you begin to see the first signs of farmland, a rusted windmill, a half-toppled fence line, a scatter of cattle grazing near a muddy creek. Civilization is creeping back in. By late afternoon, you crest a ridge and there it is, a small frontier town. The kind that sprang up alongside the railway and never quite grew past its original footprint. A cluster of tin-roofed buildings, a pub with a crooked sign, and, dominating everything, the station house. A train is parked there now, its black engine gleaming like a smug metal lizard. The caravan halts outside town, and you can feel the tension crackling in the air. People trickle out of the pub to watch, leaning on posts, squinting against the setting sun. Some of them smile, but others just look curious, as though you're a relic shambling in from another century. The cameleers lead the animals into the station yard, unloading sacks of flour, barrels of fuel, and a crate of mail. You help pass the goods along, feeling strangely like you're part of a ceremony, the last offering to an old god before a new one takes over. Historically, this handoff was exactly what happened. Camel caravans kept delivering goods to railheads long after the first trains arrived. But every time the tracks stretched a little farther, the caravan's routes shrank. Eventually, there was nowhere left for them to go. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some early train conductors used to blow extra long whistles when a caravan was in town. Just to spook the camels for fun. The animals would snort, scatter, and sometimes refuse to kneel for hours afterward. You glance at the train now and imagine it laughing at you. Night falls quickly, and the town settles into its evening rhythm, a few lights glowing in windows. Faint music drifting from the pub. The cameleers gather around their fire for what feels like one last time. They share tea brewed strong enough to wake the dead, and the oldest among them tells a story about the first time he ever saw the ocean. You sip your tea and listen, letting the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic chewing of the camels lull you. Historians still argue whether this transition from camel power to rail and eventually trucks was progress or erasure. Was something vital lost when the last caravan crossed the last stretch of empty desert? Or was this just the natural way of things, one chapter giving way to the next? When you finally crawl into your blanket, the town is silent, the train sits sleeping on its tracks. But you can't shake the feeling that it's awake, waiting for morning to come so it can roll out and take the caravan's place for good. You dream of endless rails cutting across the country like silver scars, and camels pacing alongside them, slower and slower, until one by one they fade into the dust. Dawn is different this time. There's no rush to break camp, no sense of urgency. The cameleers sit longer over their breakfast, sipping tea in silence, staring at the horizon as if trying to memorize it. You help pack the last of the gear, but you notice that some saddles stay empty. The loads are smaller now, the work is nearly done. You lead the caravan through town one final time. The streets are still quiet, just a few roosters crowing and a shopkeeper sweeping his porch. The camels plod along, their soft footfalls muffled in the dust, and for once no one stops to stare. It feels like you're invisible, or maybe like the world has already moved on. By mid-morning, you reach the last drop point, a small station siding at the edge of farmland, where a single telegraph pole hums faintly in the breeze. The goods are unloaded quickly. When the last crate is passed down, there's nothing left to do but watch as the train crew hauls everything into a waiting car. This is it, the last run is over. Historically, this moment came at different times in different regions. But by the 1930s and 40s, most camel caravans were gone, replaced by trains and, later, by trucks that could cover twice the distance in half the time. The cameleers either found new work or faded from public memory, their names barely mentioned in schoolbooks. Here's your quirky tidbit for the day. In the 1980s, long after the caravans had vanished, a group of enthusiasts tried to recreate a historic camel mail run as a tourism stunt. The camels, now feral descendants of the originals, behaved badly, chewing the saddles, refusing to kneel, and in one case trying to eat a tourist's hat. It was chaos, but it reminded everyone just how stubbornly alive this history still is. You help lead the camels out past the siding, toward a rise that looks back over the plains. The cameleers remove the saddles, patting the animals one last time before letting them drift into the open scrub. Some of the camels pause, looking back as though confused, but most simply walk away, their long legs carrying them steadily into freedom. Historians still argue whether this ending was sad or fitting, whether the cameleers deserved a monument, or whether the camels themselves are the monument, their hoofprints the only record that matters. You stand there a long time, watching until the last camel becomes a speck on the horizon, and then, slowly, the cameleers gather their few belongings and start walking toward town. The desert feels huge and empty without the animals, but strangely peaceful too. As night falls for the last time on this journey, you sit by the fire, letting the silence stretch. The air is cooler now, the stars sharp and close, You breathe in slowly, letting the desert settle into your bones. The wind down begins here. Your thoughts slow, like footsteps in soft sand. The crackle of the fire grows quieter. The shapes of the cameleers blurred by shadow until they seem more like memories than men. The camels are gone, but you can still hear them in your mind, the low grumble. The soft thud of their feet. It's a comforting rhythm, one that has echoed across this land for more than a century and will go on. Even if only in stories. The night sky above you is endless. A vast dome sprinkled with cold silver light. You imagine those stars watching as the first camel caravans set out. And watching still as their descendants roam free. Living proof that the desert always keeps what it's given. The fire burns lower. The ground feels warm beneath you. Your breathing slows until it matches the steady pulse of the earth. Whatever tomorrow brings, trains, trucks, or silence, this moment is enough. The desert is still here. The story is still here. And you are still here. Safe under the quiet sky. Let your eyelids grow heavy now. The last glow of the fire is fading. But the stars will keep watch. Somewhere out there, the camels are walking, slow and unhurried, and the desert is at peace. Good night.